Today, I'm breaking down every single one of the most disturbing mysteries from the Fallout franchise and everything we know about them, starting with a very creepy one that nobody wants to talk about. On the day the world ended, imagine if your boss demanded overtime, permanent overtime. The doors are locked for a reason. Have you ever had a job where you could feel the building turn against you? Like the place isn't just a workplace. It's not a family business, it's not a mom and pop store, it's cold, it's empty, it's corporate. But more importantly, it's a trap, or at least it turns into one, all because they needed just a little more time. That's Cambridge Polymer Labs. And what makes it disturbing isn't that things went wrong, it's that even in its final moments, the place still behaved like a company, still follows protocol, still treats human beings like they're replaceable parts in a process. Cogs in a machine aren't enough to describe how soulless and hollow the company felt once the bombs dropped, but that's where the mystery starts. Because the story Cambridge Polymer Labs tells you is not clean. It's not one villain in a lab coat. It's a chain of decisions. And chains are harder to break than villains. But what exactly was CPL? Well, Cambridge Polymer Labs was a pre-war research facility, working with military contracts, experimental smart materials and robotics of a field of science few had ever heard or worked in, nucleostrictive and piezoelectric polymers. Once the military caught on, that was all the facility could be built around, a deliverable, something they promised to produce, even if it was ultimately impossible. When you enter the place in Fallout 4, the vibe is immediate. This isn't a ruin you can loot. Well, you could, but you at least should pay some respect to the dead, or at least learn the story before you pick the place clean. But back to the point, this is a place that still feels like it expects employees to show up. There are rules, checkpoints. There's a sense that somebody, at some point, decided no one leaves until the work is done. And here's the big question. Was the lockdown a panicked reaction to the bombs, or was it the facility doing exactly what it was designed to do? Because those are two very different horrors. One is people losing their minds, the other is a system functioning perfectly, as designed, as intended. And it's not hard to imagine the order of events. Just picture it. The first alerts come in. People are whispering about the end of the world, how it might have just happened during a stressful period at the office. Phones are giving dial tones. Radios are spitting out gibberish instead of songs and news. Supervisors walking faster than normal. Something has happened. Something big, something bad. But then the radio clears the static for a brief minute. The broadcast comes through crystal clear. There's been nuclear strikes. Civil defense efforts have ended in failure. There's no time left. The end of the world is here. And in a normal and sane world, that's the moment everyone runs. But in the world of Fallout, more specifically, a place like Cambridge Polymer Labs, that's the moment leadership does something that only feels logical on paper. They lock the doors, they go into containment, they prioritize the project. Because the project is what justifies the building. The project is what justifies the contract. The project is what justifies everything, because the project is tied to national defense, the government, the same one who funded the operation for so long, the ones who the company wouldn't exist without. Then suddenly, human lives become secondary, not because people are monsters, but because systems turn people into numbers. Now, what makes the Cambridge Polymer situation feel so sinister is how it seems to spiral, not just into chaos, but into a kind of controlled chaos, like a facility trying to maintain order with brute force, security measures, containment policies, escalation. And as the situation falls apart inside, the story starts to look like a blueprint for an internal disaster, as if the one outside couldn't get any worse. People trapped inside a sealed environment, arguments about what to do, accusations. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Both to the video game and real life. But then you get the question that always appears in places like this. Who's trying to get out, and who's trying to keep them in? Because once a building becomes a prison, everyone inside becomes a suspect. And if you've ever worked in any corporate environment, you know, the most terrifying part is this. A lot of people will obey a badge and a rule even when it's clearly wrong. They'll tell themselves it's for safety, that it's temporary, that it's above their pay grade. Complacency in compliance. Abiding to the system because it's all they have left when the world ends. That's what Cambridge Polymer Labs feels like. A place where policy becomes violence. And there's another layer here that makes it worse. The lab wasn't just a place that made just plain old anything. It was a place that made objects, military objects, which means it's the kind of place that could justify anything. If the work was important enough, you could lock down the facility, suspend labor laws, what little there was left in the America of 2077, at least. Delay evacuations of the facility, you could call it patriotism. Patriotic it was not. So here's the disturbing thing. What was the priority order inside that building when the bombs fell? Because if the top priority was to protect the public, then you you evacuate. If the top priority was to protect the research, you locked down. And Cambridge Polymer Labs looks like a place that is locked down. For what, exactly? Ironically enough, nothing more than a set of shinied-up armor, all because it wasn't ready in time for a military demonstration. Now, let's talk about the emotional core of this. Because the Commonwealth is filled with raiders and monsters. But raiders don't scare you the same way this should. Plenty of raiders are chaotic. What happened at the CPL was structure. This was a workplace turning into a controlled environment where people start treating each other as obstacles. And that's the most believable horror Fallout 4 ever tells. Because it's not fantasy, it's a system. Now, here's the implication that ties into the bigger mystery. If Cambridge Polymer Labs locked itself down because of policy, then it suggests pre-war America had places that were designed to become sealed boxes during the apocalypse. Not to save the workers, but to protect the assets. And if you've played Fallout 3 or New Vegas, Cambridge Polymer Labs isn't an isolated tragedy. It's a preview of what would ultimately lead Vault Tech to study and perfect the Vault mentality, a building built around the assumption of the idea that we can always keep control if we just close the doors. And that brings us to the next file, because this next disturbing mystery may require a moment to let things sink in. This isn't a mere workplace shutdown, it's about something worse. A project, more specifically, a disease, and a detail so specific you can't ignore it. Because even if it's not listed in the game itself, the official material, the Fallout 4 game guide, mentions a virus. And it doesn't target soldiers, it targets kids. Once you hear that, you'll never look at pre-war medical research the same way again. Why was this never written down? Alright, let me start this one carefully, because it's dark. Much darker than Cambridge. MedTech research is one of those Fallout locations that feels like it's full of implications. Not just loot, not just enemies. Implications. These are the guys who brought you Fixer mentats of all flavors, infirmaries, automatic doctors, but those products we won't be focusing on here. The big mystery comes from official non-game material, the kind of text that, on first read, can be hand-waved as summarizing a location and moving on. But the Fallout 4 developers who wrote it dropped a detail that basically screams that something horrifying happened here. The detail is this: a virus, and not just any virus. A virus that specifically affected teenagers and children. Now, stop there, because that's the moment your brain should go, why would that exist? How could it exist? Why does it exist? What is the scenario where a corporation is researching a virus with that kind of targeting? There are a few possibilities. None of them are comforting. Maybe it was a genuine medical pursuit. They made Fixer and were working on Prevent. Maybe they were working on a cure to this virus as well. Perhaps there was a treatment being developed. Or if there was nothing else they could do, they might have performed containment studies. But Fallout's pre-war world rarely gives you clean charity. Fixer was a temporary fix at best, and Prevent was to be sold at price hike rates that even real-world drug companies could only dream of. So the other possibilities hover in the background like a shadow. You know the usual ones: weaponization, population control, behavioral science, optimization. And that's the mystery. Fallout 4 doesn't tell you the purpose directly. It leaves you with the implication. And the implication is horrifying. Because even if it began as medical research, it's still a world where megacorporations profit off suffering. Good thing that sort of thing never happens in real life. And MedTech as a name already sounds like one of those companies that makes its money from manufactured repeat customers and addictions to products that are supposed to help, not hurt. Compassion is a word they only know because they have to have something to tell their employees to justify the awful things they did, or telling the families of those harmed that they care, even if they really don't. Now, let's build the case. MedTech is the kind of place that, on the surface, looks like any other research facility. Sterile, clinical, professional. But the Commonwealth, along with many other regions of post-war America, is built on ruins of professionalism. Thankfully, the ruins tend to reveal what people really did when no one was watching. In Fallout, what may first appear to be nothing more than a humble medical research facility is very rarely just that. It's usually a place where ethics were negotiated down until they disappeared. So here's the core question. Who were the test subjects? Because you don't research a teen-child virus without encountering teens and children in the equation. That alone is enough to make the story feel sick. And here's the disturbing thing about Fallout's world building. It often suggests, if not outright states, the pre-war America had the ability to do things quietly, bury things, classify things. And if MedTech was researching something like this, it implies there was a chain of approval, but more dreadful than that, a demand. Somebody signed off on it. Somebody funded it. Somebody decided it was was worth doing. And it brings us back to the paperwork horror theme. When a monster reveals itself to you, you know it's evil. When a committee approves your suffering without your consent, without your knowledge, it's worse. Now, there's another piece to this. The facility, much like most facilities across the franchise, locks down when the bombs fall, and the lockdown is never lifted. That line is chilling, because it implies the place stayed sealed, not as a refuge, but as a tomb. Only substitute mummies and pharaohs for everyday workers and scientists. And in a world where people would break into anything for resources, the fact that it's framed as never lifted suggests either 1. No one could safely access it, 2. No one wanted to, or 3. Someone preferred it remain closed forever. That third possibility is the most disturbing of all, simply because in the world of Fallout, not only is that often the case, but any sane reaction is played off as irrational, while the most irrational decisions are deemed standard. The lockdown being placed upon medtech research implies that the knowledge inside is not lost. It's contained. Now, why would you contain something? Because it's dangerous. Not just physically, politically, morally. If it got out that a company was researching something targeting children, even pre-war America would have to handle the optics. Just look at how the new plague was handled. Fallout is obsessed with optics. Everything is branding, safe, and non-threatening. Everything is made with the mindset of giving the illusion that they care about you. So, you lock the facility to prevent harsh, cold reality from getting out. Lock the doors and throw away the key, and should the end of the world happen to occur that day, you simply let the bombs erase the witnesses. Then you hope history never digs it up. But history does dig it up, because what's hidden in the dark is always brought to the light sooner or later. Now, I'm not saying the game gives us every detail, it most certainly doesn't, but that's why it's a mystery. Evidence is a breadcrumb. Breadcrumbs become trails, and trails always lead to somewhere. It could take you in circles, back to where you started, or exactly what you were looking for the whole time. And here, it's the lack of explanation that becomes the story. So here's the bigger implication. Medtech is just one of the many horrors in the pre-war era that weren't just Vault Tech doing experiments, they were part of a larger ecosystem, corporate science, military contracts, classified projects, a world that was already sick before the radiation. And if the pre-war world was already okay with this, then the Commonwealth isn't a fall from grace. It's a continuation. A fall from grace doesn't begin to describe the levels of depravity this kind of thing would bring upon not just the company, but the society it was part of. Now, here's something to chew on. If medtech is about hidden research, then let's take it a step further. Go beyond research, or rather, conduct hidden research via a hidden replacement, because the Institute takes the idea of quiet evil and perfects it. And the most disturbing part? It isn't the killing, it's what comes after. A family keeps eating dinner with something who looks like their father but isn't. The Warwick replacement. Let's talk about something Fallout 4 does better than almost any other Fallout game. Paranoia. The past games certainly have their moments of feeling like someone is watching you, but the Commonwealth takes it not just a step further, but leaps beyond. Fallout 4's towns and settlements are not just built on a fear that someone you know isn't who they say they are. They were built, destroyed, and only continue to exist because of it. Most of the time, that fear feels like rumor, mere superstition, like people trying to explain chaos, until you hit Warwick Homestead. What first comes off as a humble farm, of which Fallout 4 has many, turns out to be where many players find out that the rumor isn't just rumor, it's reality. Because in this case, the game doesn't just imply replacement, it documents it, and that creates the mystery. There's no question of if it happened, because we know it happened. The mystery is, how many times did it happen when we weren't looking? Warwick feels like the one case that slipped through the cracks. Perhaps it was an intentional slip-up by the developers, or by the Institute themselves. The one case where the paperwork still exists because the Institute hasn't finished their research. They can't burn and hide everything when there is still so much left to learn and do in this experiment. And unlike Raiders, they're one group who isn't going burn, baby, burn. They sweep in within the dead of night, kill everyone, and leave like they were never there. But Warwick isn't the only one documented case. There are dozens of undocumented ones. What makes Warwick uniquely disturbing is how unassuming, civilian, how benign it is. It's not a battlefield infiltration, as they do with Dance. It's not a military target. It's a farm, a farmer and his family, a daily life. And the Institute looks at that and sees not just crops, but ripe ground to perform an experiment. They replace Roger Warwick and use him as a living sensor inside a family unit. That alone is horrifying. But the part that really stings is the purpose. It's not just espionage. They picked the homestead for a reason. It's agricultural research. They want data. They want long-term observation. They want to measure the effects of their modified crops. What kind of crops? gourds. Genetically modified gourds, but indistinguishable from everyday gourds. So to get the best results, they take away a human being's life. They take him out of the world, and they put a replica in his place. The replica certainly isn't as abusive or mean as the human version was, but it's not him. It's a hollow shell. It's simply another tool of the Institute. Now, from a pure evil logic perspective, you can see why it's efficient, but that's what makes it disturbing, because it's not a raider doing something impulsive for necessity or sadism. It's a lab doing something calculated, not just before the war, but after. And now it's experiments that to many people make no sense. MedTech working with a virus is understandable for a medical company, but the Institute is growing crops, then plans to burn away all evidence. It's the same kind of nonsensical logic Cambridge Polymer Labs and MedTech research were following, just updated, more advanced, quieter. Now, let's dig into human horror, where this will all start to make a much more sense momentarily. A synth replacement isn't just a corpse, it's a mask, a performance. As Cooper Howard would say, it seems more like an Amish production of The Count of Monte Cristo, that the family is living inside a lie orchestrated not just by a man parading around as their father, but a clinical and sterile facility of alleged geniuses who, instead of truly attempting to benefit or help the world, instead see fit to repeat endless cycles of tests, watching, notating, and destroying. Every conversation is contaminated, because you don't know when Roger was replaced, and the Institute isn't telling. Every memory becomes suspect. The Warwick family doesn't even get the dignity of knowing the truth at first. They don't get closure, not in a healthy or safe way. It took an outsider that came to the farm just before the game started, heavily paranoid of synths, to even begin getting the family to ask questions. The family, the friends, everyone gets manipulated by the Institute's ploy. And if you're the spouse or the kid, you're emotionally bonded, no longer to a human being, but instead to a thing that was built to collect data. You think your husband or father might have changed a bit, but you have no clue, no idea, that it's now a machine that has his memories, has his face, but is no longer him. That's not just murder. That's identity theft at a spiritual level. And ironically enough, the man who questions Roger to be a synth wants him murdered as well. As the old saying goes, an eye for an eye drives the whole world blind. To the Commonwealth, the only way to solve the murder of a friend or loved one is to kill the thing that replaced them. But it also means they're paranoid enough to kill flesh and blood humans simply because they think they're a robot. Now here's the mystery angle to this story. Warwick Homestead is one of the few stories where the game gives you the operational outline. The Institute lays it all out on the table. You can infer a process. And when you can infer a process, you can infer scale, identify targets, abduct, extract information, build a replica, insert replica, finally monitor until complete, then incinerate and destroy. That's a pipeline. And as Fallout 4 shows over and over again, pipelines aren't built for one unit or one routine. Pipelines are built to run. Warwick was simply one of the many demented tests the Institute was running, had forgotten about, or simply performed just to see if it was capable of performing it. It's where the Institute becomes so terrifying, because they're not raiders. They're not a cult, at least not one defined by religion. They instigate fear in how emotionless they are. They don't burn. They don't declare victory. They simply edit reality. And if reality can't be edited, they make it so it can be edited. They change one person, then another, and create processes and pipelines to satisfy a goal, be it arbitrary or highly impactful. Then they watch the world ripple. They can do it once. They can do it 1,000 or more times, with no recourse, no remorse. Warwick shows you the post-war version of science without consent, progress without ethics, experimentation without point. It's the same ethical disease as MedTech, the same as Cambridge, just evolved. Some could even call it devolved. Doesn't that remind you of someone? Or rather, something? The Institute's field experiments are basically vault experiments without vault tech branding. They turn the surface into a lab or a field experimentation site. They turn people into variables, and they never ask permission. Now, bear with me here, because as bad as replacement is, it still leaves you at least recognizably human. The world still treats you as a person-shaped object, which, let's be honest, they're not saying that about ghouls or super mutants. There are definitely worse fates out there, like what we'll look at next, because what you're about to witness takes people and turns them into equipment, not unlike the Institute and their synths. It's not a metaphor, it's literal. Brains in jars, bodies on gurneys, and a military label sealing their stamp of not only approval, but effectively an order. Prisoners go in. Machines come out. Okay, now we're getting into some of the heavy hitters. Automatron. If you've played the DLC, you probably remember the vibe. Robots everywhere, chaos on the roads, and this creeping realization that the Commonwealth's robot problem isn't new. The robo-brains might be, but a lot isn't. It's ancient. After all, robotics were baked into the pre-war world. But while we know where some of those machines came from, others we don't, like the robo-brain. Somewhere along the way, the line between robot and person got erased. The Mechanist's Lair, formerly known as Robotics Technology Facility RB2851, gives you a plethora of lore that is genuinely one of the most disturbing things Fallout has ever done. It continues a legacy of facilities that acted like a prison and treated inmates like a resource. Not people, but a resource. Something to be produced, transformed, exploited, harvested. The pipeline is simple. Prisoners go in, brains come out, robo-brains roll out. Now you might think, yeah, that's Fallout. It's dark, but sit with it for a moment. The robo-brain isn't just an ordinary protectron, a servile Mr. Handy, or a war-focused assaultron. The robo-brain's concept is uniquely horrifying in a way that's easy to miss. A normal robot is a machine, right? Well, depending on which one you meet, any robo-brain is a person trapped inside a machine. That means every robo-brain you fight is not just a hostile unit, a machine with bad programming, or having gone haywire after 200 years without maintenance. It's the aftermath of not only a medical atrocity, but an ethical and moral one. It's a mind that was stolen, altered, and locked into a chassis. Sometimes the prisoners are stripped of their memory, flushed away like a dead goldfish down a toilet. Sometimes they're scrambled, unable to recall who they are or what they were before they became conscious. Sometimes the mind simply is too smart and needs to be reduced to fragments of instinct to create the perfect killing machine. And the worst part? This wasn't done by some post-war entity like the Institute. This was done by institutions, specifically the U.S. Army, a group that pre-war citizens trusted to keep them safe and free. The U.S. Army worked with Robco and General Atomics to not just fund, but expand existing facilities with massive production and research capabilities. Facilities manned with immoral and apathetic staff, with procedures that robbed not just those it attacked, but those who worked there, of what little humanity they had remaining, with predictive and routine maintenance schedules, with compliance checklists to ensure everything was operating as intended. Again, paperwork horror. Now, here's the mystery. How widespread was this? There are a few clues to answer that. First, robo-brains appear in multiple places across the broader Fallout universe, from the very first game to the most recent game. That suggests production, distribution, and deployment. Secondly, if a facility is set up like a prison and a processing center, it implies long-term planning. Obviously, you don't build a pipeline for one or two brains. You build it for volume, mass production. And thirdly, the pre-war world of Fallout had a genuine obsession with solving human problems with machines. Police robots, security robots, military robots. And the robo-brain is the darkest expression of that obsession, because it says that, from the perspective of the military, human beings are flawed. They would much rather keep the brain and throw away the body. They would instead try to keep the intelligence and processing power of the human brain and remove the freedom and those pesky ethics and morals. Now, let's get specific about why it's disturbing. Prisoners, at least in the Fallout universe, are already a group that suffers more than necessary. Some are people who were falsely accused, thrown in prison because they looked Chinese or dared to question the government. They already have reduced rights as is. And in a corrupt, collapsing America, it's very easy to imagine somebody further reducing their humanity in the belief that they're nothing more than criminals. They're expendable, no one will miss them. That's how atrocities happen. Not with demons, but with rationalizations. Once you can rationalize it for prisoners, you can rationalize it for anyone. That's the nightmare. Now, here's the deeper mystery. If you can turn prisoners into robo-brains, then the robo-brain program becomes a quiet weapon for not just military command and combat, but also social control. You remove whoever could be considered undesirable. You convert them into useful assets. You deploy them as law enforcement, labor, or military support, and you call it efficiency. That's the kind of horror Fallout's pre-war world loved. And if you want to push it further, you can definitely know that prisoners were not the only source. Because if the pipeline exists, it creates demand, and demand leads to expansion. Now, the game explicitly shows only the most horrifying and immoral steps. It doesn't lay out every single detail for us to follow, but the implication is heavy, because any system that can accept prisoners can also accept removing the justice element and move to the dissidents without even bothering to go through any kind of legal process. Political dissidents, homeless people, unproductive citizens, captured enemies, anyone you can classify and disappear without fear of recourse or question. And in Fallout's America, classification may as well have been a national sport. Now, the biggest mystery element is this. Robo-brains exist post-war, functioning just as well as they did when they were created, even if insane and hostile. So, someone designed the tech to survive long after they deployed. deployed it, even after society collapsed, and even more than 200 years later. Which raises the question, who kept these systems alive? Was it fully automated? Robobrains creating more robobrains? Was it military continuity? Enclave remnants turning wastelanders into more killing machines? Or was it just inertia? Machines continuing to do what they were designed to do because nobody ever turned them off. That's the scariest kind of horror, a process without a human driver. A system that keeps eating people long after the original planners are dust. But after all of this, after all this corporate institutional horror, here's a shift of gears. It's still disturbing, yet in a different way. Because the last mystery isn't about a lab, or a contract, or a pipeline. It's about faith, and the possibility that the most powerful force on Far Harbor isn't a monster. It's a story. A story that guides people into the fog. A miracle that might be real, and still can be very dangerous. The mother of the fog. Far Harbor is already unsettling. The fog, radioactive and shrouding most of the land in secrecy, makes it feel like the island is breathing. The coastline and forests feel like they're watching you. Every group out there is holding on to some story just to stay sane, whether they want the fog to flood the island or to drive it back. But nothing on the island is as quietly disturbing as the mother of the fog, a local Children of Atom superstition. Because she's not a monster you can shoot. She's not a raider you can try to negotiate with. She's more like an idea-made reality, a figure, a presence. And she sits right at the intersection of religion and survival, which means she has power. Now, here's the mystery. The Children of Atom treat the mother of the fog like a kind of saint, as should anyone who meets her. They are considered truly blessed by their holy figure, Atom. She's considered something of a messenger. And when you meet her for yourself, she acts a lot like a guide, someone who appears at key moments and steers the faithful. But the game leaves room for doubt. Some people interpret her as a literal supernatural presence. Others think she might be a human hermit, an old woman surviving in the fog that gained religious significance. The game gives possibilities for both, that there's some entity and that there's an ordinary person. And you might think that makes the mystery less disturbing, but no. That's what makes it all the more intriguing. Because if she's a person, it means something terrifying. A human being can become a miracle if conditions are right. Not just talk of religious figures, but becoming one in real life due to your abilities. And Far Harbor has perfect conditions. The fog is disorienting. The island itself is very deadly. People are scared. They're exhausted. They're looking for meaning. So when someone or something appears in the fog at the right time, it feels divine. It feels like whatever deity you pray to has sent something to help you, or something to take you to your final resting place. Once it feels divine, you stop questioning it. Now here's the key point. Whether she's supernatural or human, she functions the same way. She guides people. She validates the beliefs of both those who do believe in her and those who do not. She acts as a living sign that says that the fog is not random, that the fog has a purpose. And that kind of belief can reshape an entire community. The existence of the Fog Mother comes as a sign to some as a key figure of the idea of turning survival into destiny. Now, let's zoom in on why this is disturbing. The primary religion that worships her, the Children of Atom, is not just a religion. They're an ideology built around radiation. Every sect is different, but this group is particularly militant. They interpret pain as purification. They interpret exposure as a blessing. Now at Far Harbor, where the fog literally kills people, that belief can become a weapon, not against enemies, against their own instincts, against their own self-preservation. So when the mother of the fog appears, she becomes a reinforcement mechanism, a proof, a holy stamp, a sign from Atom that what they are doing is right. Herein lies the question. Is she intentionally steering people into danger? Or, if she's supernatural, then what is she? A benevolent guide? Or a force that wants something? If she's human, then is she complicit with the Children of Atom? Is she manipulating their faith and the faith of others? Or is she sincerely trying to help? Both options are deeply unsettling. Now, there's a detail I always come back to with this. In a place like the island, people can mistake coincidence for design. They can mistake survival for divine favor. And once that happens, the story becomes self-sustaining. People will seek the miracle, they will interpret anything as a sign, they will build doctrine around it, and if you are the miracle, you can steer them, even if you never meant to. So the Mother of the Fog becomes the perfect final disturbing mystery. She demonstrates the most subtle horror in the entire DLC. Not all control is mechanical. Not all control is corporate. Sometimes control is spiritual. Sometimes Sometimes it's narrative. Sometimes it's a myth that walks through the fog and points you in a direction. And that leads us to the conclusion. Because when you lay all of these mysteries from Fallout 4 on the table, you see the same shape, the same patterns and cycles repeating over and over. Locked doors for the sake of a petty project. Controlled populations being defined by a virus that infects the youngest of us. Human beings are reduced to an input, driving everyone else mad in their paranoia. A system that treats people as expendable. A religious figure being used to help or harm a population. And the most horrifying part? Some of these systems are still running, whether it's continuations of pre-war entities, like corporations such as Vault-Tec or the government that permitted these to begin with, like the Enclave. A main theme of Fallout is that war never changes, but people do. And at the end of the day, it's not gore that horrifies people the most. It's not the monsters, the death claws, and feral ghouls. It's not even the apocalypse. It's the fact that the apocalypse didn't create the horror. It simply revealed it. Cambridge Polymer Labs shows you the corporate instinct to trap people for results. A building that treats workers like resources at the very moment the world ends, in service for nothing more than money. MedTech suggests research so ethically radioactive that the safest option was to seal it and pretend it never happened. Warwick proves the Institute will erase a person and replace them just to watch a farm grow slightly better crops. Automatron's RoboBrain pipeline shows the ultimate industrial cruelty. People turned into machinery because it's efficient. And Far Harbor shows a different kind of control. Not a lab, not a contract, a miracle. A story that can steer people into death with a gentle hand. The Commonwealth isn't terrifying because it has monsters. It's terrifying because it has systems, and some of them never shut down. So, the next time you walk into a suspiciously clean hallway, or you read a terminal entry that sounds professional but clearly uses coded language, or you hear someone say, "It's for the greater good," just remember, in Fallout, that's usually the line someone says right before they decide you're acceptable to lose. And those were Fallout 4's most disturbing mysteries. If you want to see Fallout's biggest cryptid mysteries explained, click the video on the screen.